twin suns of Itaria 6 shimmered above the jagged cliffs, casting elongated shadows across the canyon that stretched for miles in both directions. Wind howled between the stone pillars, whistling through the mineral-rich air and carrying the sharp scent of ozone and dry metal. On the far side of the Great Divide, towering observation towers had been erected, each adorned with the banners of the Galactic Engineering Academy. This was no ordinary canyon. It was the final testing ground for the most elite students of engineering across the known galaxies. And now, the exam was about to begin. Cadet Daniel Tucker stood silently at the edge of the canyon, his boots grinding against the dust-coated rock. He squinted up at the nearest observation tower where the examiners were preparing their drones and scanning equipment. Around him, other students arrived in small formations, their uniforms marking their home planets. Red for the volcanic world of Ratun, teal for the amphibious city Conies of Tyros Delta, and silver for the crystalline engineers of Zarnex Prime. Each student represented the pinnacle of their species' scientific achievement, and among them, Daniel stood alone, the only human candidate in this cycle's exam. He knew he was being watched. Whispers slithered between the others, not malicious but curious. Some saw him as a novelty, others as a mistake. The human race, while notorious for their resilience and unpredictable innovation, still remained relatively new to the elite academic circles of the galactic community. He had earned his place through countless hours of study and trial, but that didn't stop the doubt from hanging in the air. The moment the announcement system crackled to life, silence fell. A projection formed above the canyon, displaying the stern face of the lead examiner, Professor Tharek, a towering insectoid creature with sapphire exoskeleton plates that glimmered under the twin suns. His mandibles twitched as he addressed the cadets. "Welcome, candidates, to the final engineering examination. Before you lies the Ravkin Divide, a natural canyon 1.4 kilometers wide and nearly a kilometer deep. Your task is simple. Construct a bridge that connects both sides, capable of supporting a standard grav transport weighing 2 metric tons. You will work independently, without external help. You may only use materials available on this planet or created with approved exam tools. You have 100 galactic standard hours. Begin." The projection dissolved, and all at once the cadets sprang into action. Holographic tools activated, planning interfaces blinked to life, and scanning drones dispersed to survey terrain. Some began collecting data on rock strength. Others sought suitable anchor points for supports. A few even started carving foundational blocks directly into the cliff walls. Daniel didn't move at first. He knelt down instead, brushing his fingers along the dry surface of the plateau. The soil was dense with silicates, brittle yet abundant. Far below, he could make out faint glints of metallic ore embedded in the canyon walls. Usable, but not without risk. The winds were strong and unpredictable, and the temperature dropped sharply at night. He would have to design for extremes, but even more than that, he would have to think beyond the obvious. He rose slowly, taking in the wide stretch of land behind him. It was vast, relatively flat, and rich with natural resources, enough for something far more complex than a single structure. Already ideas began forming in his mind, not as blueprints or designs, but as something more intuitive, more organic. While others had their minds locked on the bridge, Daniel was beginning to envision a system, a network, a self-sustaining entity that could live and adapt long after the exam ended. One of the Zarnex students passed near him, glancing curiously at his idle state. The crystalline engineer didn't speak, but the raised, translucent brow ridges spoke volumes. Daniel ignored the silent judgment. He wasn't wasting time. He was observing. He activated his own interface, a custom neural link module embedded in his wrist. Instead of beginning with a bridge schematic, he brought up a complete terrain map of the surrounding 10-kilometer area. He expanded it, added elevation data, filtered geological structures, and flagged sources of groundwater and trace minerals. He began drawing paths, not just one across the canyon, but 5, leading outward in different directions. Some curved through mineral beds, others touched natural caves or wind-shielded plateaus. He wasn't drawing a bridge. He was plotting the skeleton of something larger. Hours passed. The sun dipped lower. Around him, others had already begun visible construction. Giant support struts rose from cliff faces. Fabrication drones hummed in the air, assembling suspension units and alloy platforms. Some had already laid foundations spanning a quarter of the canyon's width. Daniel moved to a distant spot, nearly half a kilometer from the others, where the terrain dipped slightly into a basin. He began collecting rocks, separating them by density and potential conductivity. With careful attention, he set up a mineral processor, adjusting the heat ratios manually rather than using presets. He took his time. Every action was part of something larger. By nightfall, his construction area remained mostly bare. The only visible structure was a short ring of antenna-like rods embedded in the soil. To the other students, it looked like a primitive camp. But beneath the surface, his excavation had already revealed a small aquifer. He sealed it temporarily, marking it for later. Nearby, a single drone began to drill horizontally into the side of a sandstone wall. Slow, quiet, almost unnoticeable. From the observation tower, Professor Tharek leaned forward, adjusting the zoom on his optics. "Candidate 47. HU," he said to an assistant, referring to Daniel. "What is he doing?" The assistant, a thin avian species from Calto, peered at the screen. "Initial scans indicate he's not building a bridge. No major construction detected." Tharek clicked his mandibles thoughtfully. "Unusual. Track his progress. Humans tend to diverge from expectations." The night grew colder. While many cadets rested, using shelter drones to erect temporary habitats, Daniel remained awake. He was used to sleepless nights. On Earth, he had spent years working on off-grid design systems, learning to build with minimal power, minimal tools. He relied not on brute force, but on leverage, gravity, and the invisible currents of energy that moved through all things. By the third night, while the other bridges stretched halfway across the divide, his city's first substation powered on. No one saw it happen. There were no lights, no fireworks, only a soft vibration that hummed beneath the ground. The beginnings of his foundation had already merged with the planet's natural geometry. The bridge would come, but it would not be alone. For Daniel Tucker, this wasn't just an exam. It was the first step in proving that humanity's value wasn't in building what they were told, but in imagining what had never been considered. The morning air crackled with a sharp electric chill, the kind that settled into metal and made every surface hum with latent energy. Daniel stood atop the plateau where he had spent most of the night configuring underground conduits. The sun had barely crested the horizon, but his eyes were sharp and alert. He had slept for less than 2 hours, curled beside a low-energy thermal cube he'd assembled from scrap ore and repurposed drone casing. He didn't need more rest. What he needed was precision. The drill had finished tunneling into the sandstone ridge shortly before dawn, and now the access port sat open, revealing a narrow passage reinforced with compacted mineral layers. He stepped inside, crouching as the ceiling dropped slightly. The tunnel led to a chamber where he had installed the first of his energy converters, a crude device by Galactic standards, but effective. It was already pulling geothermal energy from the planet's core heat. The air was dry and hot in that confined space, and he relished the contrast to the wind-chilled plateau above. He checked the converter's vitals, temperature stable, output increasing, no overload risk. Good. With a few keystrokes on his wrist module, he activated the next sequence in his plan. 3 drones, previously dormant, came online and silently hovered out of their cradles, awaiting orders. He directed them to begin construction on surface-level nodes spaced around the basin. Small towers no more than a meter high, each with a specific function: communication relay, weather scanner, and soil reconfiguration processor. Individually, they looked unimpressive. Together, they would become the nervous system of what he intended to build. Far in the distance, silhouettes moved against the sky. Other students working in coordinated bursts of energy, raising support beams and laying structural lines across the canyon. Some had already joined their opposing cliffs with temporary wireframes. From where he stood, Daniel could see the flicker of anti-grav pulses dancing along the spine of one such framework, glowing faintly in the morning light. It was impressive. It was also unimaginative. His mind was not confined to the test parameters. He understood what the Academy wanted: a bridge, functional, reliable, efficient. But to him, that was only a fragment of what was possible. What if the bridge was not just a structure, but a connector of systems, ideas, lives? What if it didn't just transport mass, but generated energy, processed data, and adapted to its users in real time? His plan had no intention of merely crossing a gap. It would redefine the space around it entirely. The central platform, which would serve as the heart of his autonomous system, required a base that could withstand both seismic vibrations and thermal shifts. The soil here was pliable but firm, a gift he hadn't expected. He programmed one of the drones to begin laying down the first hexagonal plate, infused with a synthetic mesh he had engineered using compressed plant fibers and trace amounts of metallic dust extracted from the canyon's edge. The result was a material both lightweight and self-healing, primitive, maybe, by the standards of Zarnexian alloy science, but far more resource-efficient. As the plate slid into position, he climbed onto it and began installing the integrated control crystal, the only component he had brought from off-world. It was a small shard, only about the size of his thumb, but capable of storing neural link command sequences and adjusting to environmental feedback. He placed it carefully in the cradle at the platform's center, and the plate vibrated with a subtle hum. His design was coming to life. Suddenly, a shadow passed over him. He glanced up to see a hover drone circling overhead, painted in the sleek black and white colors of the Academy's monitoring team. It hovered for a few seconds, took a wide-angle scan of his progress, then veered off without a sound. He smiled to himself. The system had noticed. By midday, a ring of plates had formed a circular base around the energy converter, each one equipped with a different core utility. One processed air quality, another regulated temperature zones, a third connected to the scanner towers at the basin's edge, gathering meteorological data and feeding it into his processor. The city wasn't just rising, it was already learning. As the sun climbed higher and baked the planet's crust, he took a moment to stretch. His muscles ached from crouching, lifting, calibrating, but his mind remained focused. This was the part of the work he loved most, the moment when individual elements began to synchronize and patterns emerged from chaos. He didn't need anyone's approval. He could feel it in the system's pulse. It was working. He ate a ration bar quickly, not bothering to sit. He didn't want to lose momentum. With a flick of his wrist, he summoned 2 more drones from their storage pods and tasked them with beginning construction on the vertical columns that would form the arc of his eventual transit hub. The bridge would extend from this point not as a static beam, but as a living, reactive structure, anchored in technology that would adjust its density, structure, and composition based on external forces like wind, weight, and temperature. He hadn't told anyone his full plan, not because he wanted to keep it secret, but because no one had asked. From the start of the program, the other students had kept their distance, not out of malice, more out of disinterest. He was the outsider, the anomaly. Most saw him as a risk-taker, maybe even reckless. He had heard the remarks in the dormitories, the debates about whether humans should even be allowed in the core academies, but none of that mattered to him now. His work spoke for itself. As the wind picked up, dust swirled through the basin. He raised a hand to shield his eyes and watched as the sky turned a murky copper. A storm system was forming on the horizon, minor but enough to interfere with high-altitude drone activity. He smiled again. His systems were already compensating. The weather scanner tower emitted a low pulse, warning the central processor. Within seconds, the exposed plates began retracting automatically, shielding the converter core beneath folding shells of adaptive material. It wasn't flashy. It was efficient. By late afternoon, he had completed the framework for the vertical tower that would house the bridge's origin point. It didn't look like a traditional support structure. It was asymmetrical, designed to absorb kinetic impact and redirect energy flow through embedded shock rods. The design had been inspired not by architecture, but by anatomy, specifically the human spine. He had modeled it to flex, to sway with the planet's tremors, to grow stronger under pressure. Like humans themselves, from the edge of his construction zone, he saw a trio of cadets from Tyros Delta pause to observe him. One pointed toward the strange towers rising from the ground and laughed. The others shrugged and continued walking. He didn't react. Their opinions were irrelevant. They were building bridges. He was building something far more ambitious. As darkness approached, Daniel activated the night cycle protocol. Soft blue lights illuminated the base structures, and the environmental control nodes began regulating the ambient temperature within his zone. Unlike the others who huddled inside prefab shelters or relied on disposable thermal gear, he would sleep in a space designed to adapt around him. It wasn't about comfort, it was about proving a point. that human design could be elegant, functional, and completely in tune with the environment it occupied. He lay down beside the central tower, using his jacket as a pillow. Overhead, the stars of the Andralis belt shimmered through the thinning clouds. Somewhere far above, the Academy's orbital station continued its surveillance, collecting data, analyzing performance metrics, logging every heat spike and energy surge from each cadet's construction zone. Let them watch, he thought. Let them measure every watt, every kilojoule, every decision. Because when it came time to cross the canyon, there wouldn't just be a bridge waiting on the other side. There would be a city, a beginning, and he would be ready. The third morning brought with it a hush across the canyon. The sky was layered in thick lavender clouds, streaked with streaks of silver lightning that never reached the ground. A subtle vibration passed through the ground beneath Daniel's back just as his eyes opened. He lay still for a moment, not because he needed rest, but because he wanted to listen. The hum wasn't random. It was the new relay tower syncing with the central processor, a sound he had learned to recognize as part of the system's growth. He sat up slowly and looked around. A fine mist hovered low across the basin, rising from the residual heat stored in the soil overnight. His zone had changed since he last stood. What had been half a dozen connected plates now stretched into a hexagonal formation that pulsed faintly with energy. The energy conduits beneath the surface had completed their loop hours ago, and the lights embedded within the seams blinked with coordinated precision. Daniel moved to the control platform and reviewed the readouts from the central crystal. The processor had completed its analysis of the terrain's elasticity, mapped wind shear patterns, and adjusted the energy allocation among systems accordingly. Everything was working ahead of schedule. He initiated the next construction phase, transit base integration. 3 transport pylons, stored deep beneath the mineral ridges at the basin's edge, began their slow ascent. The drones pushed them upward with methodical force, locking them into place with a series of magnetic clamps. These pylons would serve as stabilizers and energy feeders for the automated transport grid, a loop that would eventually carry resource pods, supply vehicles, and even personnel capsules across the city's perimeter. They weren't essential to a simple bridge, but his design required movement. He needed logistics. He needed intelligence distribution. He walked toward the western ridge where the sun had begun burning through the mist. The outer edge of his platform glowed with a subtle orange hue from embedded solar strips, and several nutrient pods had opened in the early light, gathering atmospheric data and converting it into usable compounds. The basin was no longer just a surface. It was alive, thinking, adjusting, learning. He began assembling the central hub for his resource node, a circular construct of interlocking panels that would receive, store, and distribute materials across the construction site. It had to be durable but flexible, capable of responding to seismic tremors and wind bursts without cracking. He used a binding agent created by compressing native sand with trace water vapor and synthetic resins produced from organic breakdown. The result hardened like stone but absorbed energy like gel. It was, perhaps, the most Earth-like thing he had made so far. The work was repetitive but deeply satisfying. He laid the panels carefully, aligning them with millimeter precision, using only a magnetic compass in his own hands. He had considered using drones, but some things he trusted only to himself. As he secured the last panel in place, he noticed a flicker of movement to the south. 2 observers stood at a distance, students from Ratun, both tall and clad in their heat-resistant engineering suits. One of them tilted his head slightly and raised a scanner, pointing it toward Daniel's hub. A few seconds passed, then the scanner lowered, and the student turned to the other and laughed. The sound, distant as it was, carried a tone of smugness. Daniel didn't respond. He had heard that laugh before, in countless forms, on Earth, during his academy interviews, even on the transport ship that brought him here. It always preceded dismissal. He pressed his palm against the resource node's interface, and the panel vibrated, unlocking its core. A coil of fiberglass tubing emerged from within, connecting to the energy grid. With one smooth motion, he sealed the joint and stood back. The structure hissed faintly, then glowed, sending a pulse through the system. His city's heart had begun to beat. Behind him, the surface dome he had initiated the day before had reached knee-hip. It wasn't much yet, just a skeleton of what would become a weather-controlled central hub, but its growth was steady. The entire construct had been designed to adapt its own materials based on environmental feedback. If the wind shifted or the temperature dropped, the dome's outer shell would respond within seconds, shifting texture or opacity to retain optimal internal conditions. Eventually, it would host command nodes, sleeping quarters, and a live feed monitoring system for the canyon bridge. He returned to his interface module and accessed the bridge overlay. The arch had been plotted the day before, but now he needed to adjust it based on real-time data. The software updated itself as the terrain continued to shift under solar heating. He reprogrammed the extension points, widening the arch by 3 meters and reinforcing the midsection with new anchor placements. This bridge wouldn't merely span the canyon. It would be part of the network, connected to every sensor, every node, and every tower he had placed across the basin. As he worked, the shadow of a drone passed directly overhead. He glanced up and recognized the markings, white triangles etched into black plating. High-grade surveillance drone, instructor level. He gave a faint nod to no one in particular and returned to work. By the end of the day, the hub was operational, the surface dome was sealed, and the vertical lift column had reached its halfway point. It stood proud and strange against the sky, a jagged tower of seemingly mismatched material that nonetheless held a perfect internal symmetry. He stepped onto the platform and activated the command ring. The system responded immediately. Lights flared, drones aligned, and a soft hum issued from beneath the surface as the sublevels powered up. He was building upward now, not just out. His city would grow in 3 dimensions, carving itself into the land while reaching toward the stars. He initiated the fabrication of the habitation modules, hexagonal pods that would attach to the lift column like petals. Each module would be self-contained, powered by its own energy cell, and capable of full environmental control. Eventually, he would install research terminals, comms relays, and hydroponic growth stations inside them. He worked long into the night. As the stars emerged and the others retreated to their rest stations, Daniel remained alone with the rhythmic hum of machines. The city's AI had begun taking initiative, relocating power, stabilizing grid fluctuations, redirecting drones without his input. It wasn't sentient, but it was smart enough to learn from patterns. He had trained it on Earth using hundreds of simulations, each one modeling extreme planetary conditions. Now those patterns were paying off. At some point past midnight, the ground trembled slightly beneath him. Not enough to panic, but enough to alert his sensors. He checked the data stream. A small tectonic adjustment several kilometers beneath the canyon. Unusual, but not dangerous. The AI responded instantly, redirecting power from non-critical nodes to structural stabilizers. The dome shifted its foundation deeper into the soil. The tower retracted its upper segment slightly to reduce pressure. Daniel watched the entire sequence unfold in silence. No hesitation, no errors, just response and adaptation. Exactly what he had built it to do. Somewhere in the darkness, another bridge segment collapsed with a distant metallic shriek. He couldn't tell whose it was, but the sound was unmistakable. He didn't look up. He activated the internal diagnostics and ran a full system check. Everything held. His project was still in sync, and somewhere deep in his chest, he felt something shift. Not pride, not satisfaction. Something more electric, more fragile. This was working. He stood for a long time at the edge of the platform, watching his creation pulse gently in the dark. He imagined what it would look like in 3 days, 5 days, a month. He saw light rails crossing between towers, data streaming through glowing conduits, power flowing like blood through veins of metal and wire. He saw movement, life, purpose. He didn't know who would cross this bridge, but when someone did, they wouldn't just arrive on the other side. They would arrive in a place that breathed, that thought, that remembered. A city not built to impress, but built to evolve. And this was only the beginning. The following day began without warning. The sky was an opaque blue-gray, heavy with electric charge that crackled faintly in the wind. A mild storm had brushed the northern hemisphere of the planet during the night, bringing with it enough static discharge to trip lesser systems. Daniel's zone, however, remained fully functional. The outer plates of the dome had darkened to absorb the excess radiation, and the atmospheric scrubbers had already adjusted their filtration rates. He didn't need to check the diagnostics to know everything had held. The air felt too balanced, the wind too regulated, for there to be a fault. As he walked from the dome's entryway to the central platform, the city seemed to awaken around him. Drones emerging from maintenance hatches, lights shifting gradually to match the ambient brightness, power flows adapting to the solar curves. The system no longer required constant input. It had begun making its own micro-decisions based on preset priorities. His presence was becoming supplementary, not central. That was exactly as he had intended. Daniel reached the vertical tower and activated the lift. The platform hummed and ascended silently, carrying him 20 meters into the air, where the first layer of habitation pods had already formed a ring. From that height, the view changed. The basin no longer looked like a construction site. It resembled a living organism, its parts synchronized in rhythm. The soil had been reshaped into patterns that diverted wind and retained moisture. Power lines were buried deep, hidden from sight but pulsing with energy. The drones moved with purpose, no longer building randomly but following emergent sequences. They had begun optimizing themselves. He stepped off the platform and entered the first pod. Inside, the temperature was perfect, mild and dry, calibrated to human biology. The lighting adjusted the moment he entered, softening to a warm hue. A console at the far end blinked, displaying updated schematics for the transit hub. He reviewed the energy distribution charts. The city was producing more than it consumed. That meant he could expand. He returned to the tower and initiated the next phase of development. 2 new drones launched from their holding bays and moved toward the southern slope of the basin. Their task? Begin constructing the agricultural module. It would be a small dome, outfitted with hydroponic systems designed to grow algae and leafy greens from filtered atmospheric moisture and native minerals. He hadn't planned to build it until the final stages, but the surplus power made it possible now. If the system could feed itself, even in minimal amounts, then it had truly become independent. The bridge was next. He accessed the master controls and initialized the bridge's extension protocols. Anchors embedded into the cliffside responded with a deep groan, sliding forward and unfolding like the limbs of a dormant creature. Segmented plates began rising from beneath the earth, pulled into place by gravity stabilizers and internal magnets. The arch of the bridge took shape not as a straight beam, but as a flowing asymmetrical structure that curved with the land. Every part of it was linked to the city's core processor. It would not only carry weight, it would measure it, redistribute it, and adapt to changes in real time. Daniel didn't bother to watch the entire process. The system would finish it better without his interference. Instead, he descended and walked to the north edge of the city, where the communication array stood like a single sentinel. It had been relatively quiet. No incoming signals from the academy, no interruptions. But now the panel blinked. He tapped it and watched as a message unfolded across the screen. It was brief and direct. Candidate 47, IHU. Your progress has deviated from standard expectations. Continue. He stared at the words for a moment, then dismissed them. It wasn't a reprimand, it wasn't praise either. It was something in between. Curiosity, perhaps, or quiet disbelief. He knew his design wasn't what the academy had asked for, but it was what the test demanded, whether the instructors admitted it or not. The rest of the day passed in continuous expansion. The outer rim of the basin was marked with guide beacons for future construction. The water purification unit came online, recycling groundwater through layers of bioreactive filters. He installed a data terminal near the city center, giving him real-time access to every function. Air pressure, wind direction, nutrient flow, drone paths, power surges. He monitored it all while lying beneath the solar canopy, watching the sky darken with the approach of another quiet storm. By late afternoon, he had completed the initial scaffolding for the northern tower, designed not for habitation but for observation and long-range data analysis. From its top floor, he could scan the other zones across the canyon. He had rarely looked at them directly. He knew the other cadets had built what the exam required. Bridges, stable and technical, each unique in its own way. But none of them had done what he had. None had redefined the objective. Through the scope of his data lens, he could see dozens of bridge structures, some elegantly curved, others heavily reinforced with alien alloys. One cadet from Zarnex Prime had built a floating platform powered by ionic levitation. Another from Tyros Delta had created an organic structure that grew out of the ground using engineered vines. Both were remarkable. But both remained what they were meant to be, bridges. He zoomed out. His city, in contrast, stretched like a constellation across the basin, glowing with power nodes, its towers interconnected, its systems breathing in sync. The bridge was part of it, but no longer the centerpiece. It had become a vein, not a destination. That distinction mattered. He climbed to the top of the observation tower and let the wind press against his back. His arms rested against the railing as he stared at the horizon. He could feel the tension in the atmosphere, the quiet charge of something about to tip. He wasn't sure if it would be the system or the exam or the reaction of the academy, but something was coming. He could feel it in his bones. As the first raindrops began to fall, his platform lights adjusted automatically to compensate for the diminished visibility. Drones returned to their shelters, solar strips closed. Moisture capture systems opened like petals, drawing in the falling water to store and redistribute. He didn't move. He let the rain strike his skin and flow down his neck. The storm was mild, no threat to his work, no danger to the systems. It was just weather. But the silence it brought made the moment feel larger. Beneath him, the city pulsed. A soft blue glow outlined the bridge as it completed its rise, arcing into the canyon like a gesture of defiance or an invitation. It did not wobble. It did not tremble. It stood in perfect balance, supported not only by its own structure but by the logic of the city behind it. He walked slowly down the tower, entered the control pod, and checked the final diagnostics. Structural stability, 100%. Energy reserves, 187%. Automation efficiency, 93%. Unprompted AI adaptations, 6%. It was more than he had hoped for. He keyed in a new command, an expansion algorithm for the secondary living module, and watched as the drone sprang into action without hesitation. His city was no longer a prototype. It was evolving, building itself faster than he could direct. As night fell, a gentle orange halo encircled the city. From space, it would look like a pulse on a quiet planet's surface. No one else had done this. No one else had tried. The test wasn't over, he knew that. But something fundamental had shifted. He was no longer a cadet completing an assignment. He was an architect standing at the edge of something larger. And he wasn't going to stop. The dawn that followed was unlike any Daniel had seen on Niteria 6. The clouds had vanished overnight and the sky stretched clear and endless above him, painted in gradients of pale gold and indigo. The air tasted sharp, clean, almost ceremonial, as if the world itself were holding its breath. He stood at the edge of his bridge, his boots planted firmly on the gleaming surface, and watched the first transport capsule glide silently from the central tower to the southern ridge. The city was awake, completely, unmistakably alive. The bridge no longer looked like a structure. It shimmered, curved, and moved like a living organism. Thin pulses of light traveled along its length, reacting to the capsule's weight and redistributing power through embedded filaments that fed back into the city's core systems. The support towers flexed with the canyon's shifting air currents, their shape fine-tuned to resonate with specific frequencies and cancel micro-vibrations. Everything was silent, yet everything moved. Daniel exhaled and checked his wrist console. The final algorithm had completed during the night. The city's core processor had self-corrected its power allocation, adjusted the hydroponic schedules, and even redesigned the secondary tower's insulation layer to account for an unexpected drop in nighttime temperature. What had once been a prototype was now a system. What had once been an exam project was now an autonomous, intelligent settlement, an integrated organism capable of long-term adaptation, resilience, and growth. He turned his gaze toward the far cliffs. Small figures had begun to gather at the other side of the canyon. Cadets from the other zones, their instructors, and a handful of academy officials wearing long, flowing robes marked with the insignia of the Galactic Engineering Council. A temporary platform had been erected there, hovering slightly above the cliff's surface. From this distance, the observers looked like motionless shadows against the light, but he could feel their presence. He could sense the weight of their silence. He knew what they saw. He had no illusions about the contrast between his work and the rest. The others had built what was asked, a bridge in various forms, each sophisticated and valid in its own way. But he had done something else, something no one had anticipated. He had reframed the very definition of success. The observers did not move. No signals were sent, no drones approached for interviews or scans. Daniel waited in the center of the bridge, his city behind him, the canyon beneath him, and the academy across from him. Then a soft chime echoed from his wrist console. Candidate 47, HCU. Proceed to the primary evaluation platform. He tapped the confirmation without hesitation and stepped onto the bridge. The capsule that awaited him was open, sleek, and silent. As he sat, the harness slid across his chest and locked gently into place. The capsule detached from the docking bay and moved across the canyon, gliding with a smoothness that felt like floating through time. Below him, the canyon walls fell away into shadow, and above, the sky widened into a perfect arc. The journey took less than 2 minutes, but it felt longer. He was not nervous, he was not even proud, he was aware, fully and undeniably present. The capsule docked on the platform, the door opened, and he stepped out into the stillness. 12 council members stood before him in a semicircle. At the center was Professor Thoric, his exoskeletal plates polished to a mirror sheen, his forearms folded with measured stillness. To his right stood a female instructor from Zarnex Prime, her crystalline skin refracting light into 1,000 colors. To his left, a human representative, Dr. Lena Cho, head of the Interspecies Admissions Program. None of them spoke immediately. Daniel stood tall, his hands relaxed at his sides, the wind rustling gently through his jacket. Finally, Professor Thoric stepped forward. "Candidate Daniel Tucker," he said, his voice deep and crackling. "You were given a task with clear parameters. You were instructed to construct a bridge, a single bridge." Daniel nodded once. "I was." The professor tilted his head. "And yet, you constructed something else." "Yes," Daniel said, "I did." Thoric paused, his mandibles clicking faintly. "Why?" Daniel did not hesitate. "Because a bridge is not only a structure, it is a connection. And a connection, if designed well, should be more than a path. It should become a system, a place of exchange, of support, of life." Thoric turned slightly, exchanging glances with the others. A long silence followed. Then Dr. Cho stepped forward. "You understood that deviating from the assignment could result in failure," she said. Her voice was measured, but there was something in her eyes. "Not challenge, recognition." "I did," he replied. "But I also understood that following the assignment too literally would limit what I could demonstrate. I wasn't trying to rebel. I was trying to solve a larger problem." Thoric's mandibles twitched again. He gestured toward the canyon. "Explain." Daniel took a breath. "A simple bridge solves a single moment, a need to cross. But what happens after the crossing? What greets those who arrive? What sustains them? What allows them to build, to expand, to thrive? A bridge should not be a conclusion, it should be a beginning. So I created a system that could receive and grow from every crossing." The Zarnexian instructor nodded slowly. Her voice shimmered as she spoke. "You built not just a bridge, but an infrastructure, a living city." "Yes," he said, "and it can keep growing, with minimal input. It learns, it adapts, it survives." Another long pause. Then Professor Thoric turned toward the projection drone hovering silently nearby. "Record the following," he commanded. "Candidate Daniel Tucker, project designation 47, HUM, has completed the final examination of the Galactic Engineering Academy. His submission is declared non-conforming to standard evaluation models. However, by unanimous council decision, this project is accepted not only as valid but as exemplary. Effective immediately, Daniel Tucker is granted honors graduation with distinction and offered immediate placement within the Academy's Advanced Systems Division." The drone blinked once, confirming the record. Thoric turned back to Daniel. "You did not follow the rules," he said, "but you revealed something we had forgotten, that innovation is not bound by instructions, it is bound by intent." Daniel exhaled slowly. He didn't smile, not yet. Dr. Cho approached him and extended her hand. "Congratulations, Daniel, you didn't just pass, you changed the standard." He accepted the handshake, the weight of everything beginning to settle into his chest, not as pressure, but as understanding. An hour later, he stood once more at the center of his city. The lights glowed warmly around him, the bridge stretched behind him, still humming gently with energy. The processors were already drafting plans for further modules, educational centers, visitor docks, long-term sustainability labs. The city would continue to evolve, not because he told it to, but because he had designed it to. He looked across the canyon one last time. The observers had departed. The platforms had powered down. Only the silence of achievement remained. He placed his palm on the central terminal. The crystal pulsed beneath his skin. He wasn't a cadet anymore. He wasn't just a builder. He was a creator, and the city, his city, would carry that legacy forward, one pulse, one crossing, one evolution at a time.